My daughter called me at 2:30 in the morning, whispering just 5 words, "Dad, please come get me." When I arrived at her in-law's estate 15 minutes later, her mother-in-law blocked the door and said she is not leaving. I did not ask twice. I forced my way in. When I found my daughter unconscious in the bathroom with fresh bruises on her arms, my blood did not just boil, it turned into ice. They thought I was just a retired 66-year-old man they could push around. They forgot that before I retired, I spent 40 years hunting down professional con artists, and I know exactly how to dismantle a lie. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. The rain was already hammering against the roof of my small bungalow when the phone rang. It is a sound no parent ever wants to hear in the dead of night. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:30 a.m. My heart skipped a beat even before I saw the caller ID. It was Mia. My daughter never calls at this hour. She knows I sleep light, but she also knows I value my rest. I slid the answer button and held the phone to my ear. I did not speak. I waited. "Dad, help me." Her voice was barely a breath. It was trembling. I heard a thud in the background, like a heavy door closing, and then the line went dead. I did not call her back. If she was whispering, it meant she could not talk. If she hung up, it meant someone was coming. I threw the covers off. My body moved on muscle memory. I am 66 years old, but I do not move like an old man. Not tonight. I opened the biometric safe in my closet. The green light beeped and the door popped open. I took out my registered Sig Sauer and a spare magazine. I did not plan to use it, but I would rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I grabbed my keys and walked out into the storm. My Ford truck roared to life, waking up the quiet cul-de-sac. I threw it into reverse and backed out without looking. The Caldwell estate was 20 minutes away on the north side of town, where the driveways are long and the secrets are deep. I made the drive in 10 minutes. The rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the streetlights into streaks of white and red. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Mia had been married to Bradley Caldwell for 3 years. I never liked him. He was soft, a man who let his mother make all his decisions. But Mia loved him, or she thought she did. I had stayed out of their way. I had been the polite father-in-law. I sat at their fancy dinners and ignored the snide comments Patricia Caldwell made about my pension and my cheap suits. But tonight, the polite father-in-law stayed home. Tonight, a different man was driving this truck. I screeched to a halt in front of the Caldwell Manor. The house looked like a fortress in the rain. Every light on the second floor was on, but the massive wrought iron gates were closed tight. A red light blinked on the intercom system. I rolled down my window and the rain instantly soaked my arm. I pressed the buzzer and held it down. I stared through the iron bars at the long driveway. I saw Mia's car parked crookedly near the fountain. The headlights were still on. She had tried to leave. I pressed the buzzer again. No answer. They knew I was here. They were ignoring me. I looked at the 12-foot-high fence. I looked at the heavy lock. I put the truck into gear. I was not going to wait for an invitation. The intercom buzzed with a static hiss that cut through the sound of the falling rain. I stared into the small camera lens embedded in the stone pillar, waiting for a reaction. A moment later, the screen flickered to life. Patricia Caldwell's face appeared in grainy black and white, but even through the distortion, I could see she was perfectly put together. Her hair was immaculate. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my truck. It was nearly 3 in the morning, yet she looked like she was expecting company. That was my first clue that something was staged. People woken from a deep sleep do not look composed. They look confused. Patricia looked annoyed and dangerously calm. "Go home, Jack," she said, her voice tinny through the speaker. "You are making a scene in my neighborhood. Mia is sleeping. She had a long night, and she does not need her father showing up drunk and banging on the gates." I was not drunk. I have not touched a drop of alcohol since my wife passed away 5 years ago. Patricia knew that. She was trying to build a narrative for the security recordings. She was already playing the game. I did not answer her accusations. My eyes were busy doing what they did for 40 years. I scanned the background behind the gates, looking for inconsistencies in her story. The driveway was well lit by landscape lighting. That was when I saw the first crack in her lie. Mia's silver sedan was parked haphazardly near the large marble fountain, about 50 yards up the drive. It was not in the garage where it belonged. Rain was hitting the hood of the car and evaporating into a thin mist. Steam. The hood was hot. A car engine cools down within an hour in this weather. If Mia had been asleep for hours like Patricia claimed, the car would be sold. That car had been driven in the last 20 minutes. Then I saw the second thing. It was small, something most people would miss in the dark and the rain. A single beige high-heel shoe was lying on its side in a puddle halfway between the car and the front door. It was not placed there. It was dropped or kicked off. My daughter treats her shoes like gold. She would never leave one of them soaking in the mud unless she was being dragged away from it. "Open the gate, Patricia." I said, my voice low and steady. I know she is not sleeping. Her car is hot and her shoe is in the driveway. Patricia paused. For a split second, the mask slipped and I saw a flash of genuine fear in her eyes before the arrogance returned. "She is not leaving, Jack," she hissed. "And neither are you. I have already called security. Get off my property." The screen went black. The red light on the intercom turned solid, indicating the connection was cut. She thought that was the end of the conversation. She thought a locked gate and a stern voice were enough to stop a father who just realized his child was being held against her will. She was wrong. I shifted my truck into reverse and backed up until my rear bumper was almost touching the neighbor's hedge. I looked at the wrought iron gates. They were decorative, meant to keep out solicitors, not a 2-ton pickup truck with a reinforced steel bumper. I took a deep breath and gripped the steering wheel. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt cold precision. I shifted into drive and slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The tires spun for a fraction of a second on the wet asphalt before catching traction. The engine roared. The distance closed in a heartbeat. The impact sounded like a thunderclap. Metal screamed as the lock shattered and the heavy gates flew open, banging violently against the stone pillars. I did not slow down. I drove over the debris tires, crunching over twisted iron, and accelerated up the driveway toward the front door. I slammed the truck into park right on their pristine, manicured lawn, leaving deep, muddy ruts in the grass. I did not bother to turn off the engine. I was out of the cab and running up the stone steps before the wipers had finished a single cycle. The front door was a massive slab of solid oak reinforced with iron. A normal man would have knocked. A normal man would have waited. But I knew that every second I waited was a second my daughter remained in danger. I used the heavy steel flashlight from my truck and smashed the decorative glass pane beside the handle. The sound of shattering glass was swallowed by the storm. I reached through the jagged opening, unlocked the deadbolt, and kicked the door open. The foyer was warm and smelled of expensive lilies and old money. But the atmosphere changed the moment I stepped onto the marble floor. Trent Caldwell was waiting for me. He stepped out from the living room, blocking the hallway that led to the bedrooms. He was 35 years old, 6'2", and built like a linebacker. In his hands, he gripped a wooden baseball bat. He was not holding it defensively. He was holding it like an executioner. "You made a big mistake coming here, old man," Trent said. His eyes were wide and dilated. He looked wired. He swung the bat. It was a vicious, horizontal arc meant to take my head off. He expected me to flinch. He expected me to back away. That is what most people do when faced with a weapon. They retreat. But 40 years of fieldwork taught me a different lesson. When someone swings a long weapon, you do not step back. You step in. You close the distance to suffocate their power. I ducked under the path of the bat and lunged forward. My shoulder slammed into his chest, knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled back, knocking over a priceless vase, but he did not drop the weapon. He raised it again for a downward strike. I did not give him the chance. I drove the heel of my boot hard into his right knee. The sound of the joint popping was louder than the rain outside. Trent screamed a high-pitched sound that did not match his tough appearance and crumpled to the floor, clutching his leg. I kicked the bat away, and it skittered across the marble floor, stopping at the foot of the grand staircase. "I have called the police, Jack." Patricia was standing at the top of the stairs. She was filming me with her phone, her hand steady, her face twisted in a mask of triumph. "You are going to prison for assault," she yelled. "You broke into my house and attacked my son. I have it all on video." I did not look at her. I did not care about her video or her threats. I stepped over Trent, who was groaning on the floor, and scanned the hallway. "Mia," I shouted. Silence. Then I saw it. A thin line of light coming from under the door of the guest bathroom at the end of the hall. My stomach dropped. I ran past the expensive paintings and the silk wallpaper. The door was locked. I could hear nothing from inside. No water running. No crying. Nothing. Mia opened the door, I yelled, pounding on the wood. No answer. I took a step back and braced myself. I drove my foot into the area right next to the handle. The wood splintered. I kicked again, harder this time, and the door flew open, banging against the tile wall. The room smelled of bleach and something metallic. I looked into the tub, and my world stopped. Mia was curled up in the fetal position in the dry porcelain tub. She was fully clothed. Her skin was the color of ash. Her hair was matted with sweat sticking to her forehead. But what made me freeze were her arms. Her sleeves were pushed up, and dark purple bruises in the shape of fingerprints were blooming around her delicate wrists. Someone had held her down. Someone had pinned her there. She was not moving. I drove like a man possessed. The speedometer buried the needle past 90 as I wove through the slick, empty streets toward St. Jude's Hospital. Mia was slumped against the passenger door, her breathing shallow and ragged. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on her cold shoulder, trying to transfer some of my warmth to her. "Stay with me, Mia," I said over and over, my voice cracking. "Just stay with me." I screeched into the emergency bay, abandoning the truck right in the ambulance zone. I scooped her up in my arms. She felt terrifyingly light, as if the last few years of marriage to that family had drained the very substance out of her. I kicked the sliding doors open and shouted for help. Nurses swarmed us immediately, taking her from my arms and laying her onto a gurney. I tried to follow them into the trauma room, but a hand firmly planted on my chest stopped me cold. I looked up, expecting to see a security guard. Instead, I was looking into the cold gray eyes of Dr. Lawrence Thorne. He was the Caldwell family concierge doctor, the kind of man who made house calls for $5,000 and knew how to write prescriptions that kept rich housewives quiet. He was not wearing scrubs. He was wearing a tailored suit. He had beaten me here. "Step back," Mr. Reed Thorne said, his voice smooth and practiced. "We have the situation under control." "Get out of my way, Thorne," I growled, trying to push past him. "She has been assaulted. Look at her wrists." Thorne did not budge. He adjusted his silk tie and looked at me with pity that felt like a slap. "Mia is not a victim of assault, Jack. She is having a psychotic break. She has been self-harming for weeks. Those bruises on her wrists are from where Bradley tried to stop her from hurting herself tonight. We have been treating her for severe paranoia and delusions." The lie was so bold, so perfectly rehearsed, that for a second I was speechless. They were flipping the script. They were turning the victim into the villain. "You are a liar," I shouted, my voice echoing in the sterile hallway. I saw the bruises. I saw the fear in her eyes. "I am going in there to see my daughter." I shoved him. It was not a punch, just a shove to get him out of my path. Thorne stumbled back and acted as if I had shot him. He raised his hands in a theatrical gesture of surrender, just as the automatic doors behind me slid open. Blue and red lights flashed against the white walls. 2 police officers marched in. I recognized one of them, Sergeant Miller. He played golf with Trent Caldwell on Sundays. I felt a wave of relief that was instantly crushed. Miller walked right past Thorne. He did not ask about the unconscious woman. He did not ask about the doctor blocking a father. He walked straight to me. "Jack Reed." "Place your hands behind your back," Miller said, unholstering his taser. "Are you kidding me?" I asked, staring at him. "My daughter is in there half dead, and this man is covering it up. We have a statement from Mrs. Patricia Caldwell that you broke into her home, assaulted her son, and kidnapped Mrs. Mia Caldwell. Against medical advice," Miller droned on, reciting the lies as if they were facts. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault and trespassing." I looked at Thorne. He was smoothing his lapels, a small satisfied smirk playing on his lips. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, I realized the terrifying truth. This was not just a family dispute. This was a coordinated strike. And I had walked right into the kill zone. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. My right wrist was cuffed to a metal rail attached to the table. Sergeant Miller sat across from me, tapping a pen against a thick file folder. He looked bored. For him, this was just paperwork. For me, it was the systematic dismantling of my life. "You are looking at 3 felonies, Jack Miller said without looking up. Aggravated burglary, destruction of private property over $5,000, and assault with a deadly weapon." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Since when is a knee a deadly weapon, Miller?" "Since you used it to cripple a man in his own home," Miller replied, sliding a photo across the table. It was a still frame from Patricia's phone video. It showed me standing over Trent, who was curled on the floor. Without context, without the sound of Trent threatening me with a bat, it looked like a cold-blooded attack. "And since you used your truck as a battering ram, the district attorney is already talking about denying bail. The Caldwells have a lot of friends downtown." I leaned forward as far as the chain would allow. "I did not break into that house, Miller. I entered to prevent a felony in progress. My daughter was being held against her will. She was drugged. You saw her. You saw the state she was in." Miller closed the folder. "I saw a woman having a mental health crisis, Jack. And I saw a father who snapped and took the law into his own hands. You used to be in the game. You know how this looks. I did know. That was the problem. I knew exactly how the system worked because I had used it for 40 years. The truth does not matter as much as the narrative. And right now, Patricia Caldwell controlled the narrative." The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Oscar Vance walked in. He was wearing a rumpled trench coat over his pajamas, but his eyes were sharp as razors. He did not look at Miller. He looked straight at me. "Don't say another word, Jack," Oscar said, his voice commanding. Miller stood up. "You can't just barge in here, Vance. We are in the middle of processing." "You are done processing," Oscar snapped, tossing a sheaf of papers onto the table. "The judge just signed the bail order. $50,000. It is already posted. Unless you have a murder charge, you are hiding. Unchain my client. Now." Miller's jaw tightened. He glared at me one last time before pulling out his keys. The cuffs clicked open. I rubbed my wrist where the metal had dug in. I expected to feel relief. But as I looked at Oscar, I realized something was wrong. Oscar Vance has been my friend for 20 years. I have seen him stare down mob bosses and corrupt senators without blinking. But right now he looked pale. He was not looking at me with victory. He was looking at me with fear. "We need to go, Jack," Oscar said, grabbing my arm. "What is it?" I asked as he pulled me into the busy hallway of the precinct. "Did they press more charges?" Oscar stopped near the exit. He looked around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "It is Mia. I called the hospital to get her chart transferred to a secure facility. I wanted to get her away from Dr. Thorne. And I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. She is gone, Jack." "What do you mean gone?" "She was unconscious. She was in critical care. She was discharged 20 minutes ago," Oscar said. Bradley signed the release forms. He claimed he was transferring her to a private specialist. The hospital let her go. "Jack, she is not in the system anymore. They took her. We did not even make it to the parking lot before the next hammer dropped." Oscar was on his phone, his face turning a shade of gray that I had never seen on him before. He listened for a moment, then hung up and looked at me like I was a dead man walking. "They moved fast, Jack," he said, his voice low. "Faster than I thought possible. While you were chained to a table in that interrogation room, Patricia Caldwell was standing in front of a family court judge. She did not wait for business hours. She filed an emergency ex parte petition." I stopped walking. I knew what ex parte meant. It meant one-sided. It meant a hearing where only one party is present. I was not there to defend myself. I was not there to explain that Trent had a baseball bat, or that Mia was drugged and unconscious in a bathtub. The judge only saw what Patricia wanted him to see. She showed him the video of a crazy old man kicking down a door and assaulting her son. She showed him the police report from Sergeant Miller describing me as unhinged and violent. And she had the sworn affidavit from Dr. Thorne stating that I had interrupted a critical medical intervention for a patient suffering from severe psychosis. The judge bought it hook, line, and sinker. Oscar handed me his tablet. I stared at the digital document, but the words blurred together. Temporary conservatorship granted to Bradley Caldwell due to the incapacitation of the spouse. They had declared Mia mentally incompetent based on Thorne's lies. And because I was arrested for violence, I was deemed an immediate threat to her safety. They had not just taken my daughter, they had legally stolen her personhood. She was now property of her husband, and by extension, her mother-in-law. A black sedan pulled up to the curb right in front of us. A man in a cheap suit stepped out holding a thick manila envelope. He did not look me in the eye. He just looked at the photo on his phone, then at my face. "Jackson Reed?" he asked. I did not answer, but he did not need one. He shoved the envelope into my chest. "You have been served," he mumbled and got back into his car. I tore open the envelope. It was a restraining order, but it was not just for the Caldwell estate. It was a protective order covering Mia Caldwell herself. The text was bold and clear. I was prohibited from having any contact with the protected person, either direct or indirect. I could not call her, I could not write to her, and I certainly could not go save her. Oscar looked at the paper and shook his head. 500 feet, Jack. If you get within 500 feet of Mia anywhere in the state of Connecticut, you go to prison. And this time there will be no bail. They have built a wall around her, and they used the law to do it. I crushed the paper in my hand. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavier than before. I was a father who had spent his life fighting fraud, and I had just been outsmarted by the biggest con of all. I looked at Oscar. "Take me home," I said. "I have work to do. They think a piece of paper is going to stop me. They are wrong." Oscar dropped me off at the curb and sped away to start drafting our counterattack. But as I walked up the driveway of the house I had lived in for 30 years, I stopped cold. The front door was not just unlocked. It was standing slightly ajar, swinging gently in the damp wind. The lock had been picked. It was clean work, professional work. I pushed the door open and stepped into what used to be my sanctuary. It looked like a hurricane had spawned inside my living room. Books were pulled off the shelves and spine ripped open. The sofa cushions were slashed, their stuffing bleeding out onto the floor. My desk drawers were pulled out and dumped. But this was not a robbery. My television was still on the wall. My watch collection was still on the dresser. I walked over to where my desktop computer used to sit. The tower was on the floor, smashed open. The hard drive had been removed, and judging by the metal shards on the carpet, it had been drilled through. A common burglar steals a computer to sell it. A professional destroys a computer to erase a digital footprint. They were not looking for money. They were scrubbing my life. They wanted to make sure that whatever Mia had told me, whatever digital breadcrumbs she might have sent me, were gone. I stood in the center of the chaos and felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Patricia Caldwell made a tactical error. By destroying my house, she confirmed my theory. She was terrified. You do not send a cleanup crew to the house of a crazy old man unless he holds the key to your destruction. They thought they got everything. They thought they were thorough. But they forgot who raised Mia. I did not raise a princess. I raised a survivor. I taught her that when you are in a corner, you do not scream, you plant evidence. I closed my eyes and replayed our last meeting. It was 2 weeks ago at a barbecue at their estate. Mia had looked tired, but she was acting normal until she hugged me goodbye. She had held on tight. Too tight. Her hands had lingered around the collar of my jacket. She had whispered, "I love you, Dad. Stay safe." At the time, I thought she was just being emotional. Now I knew it was a handoff. I walked to the hall closet. It had been ransacked, 2 coats thrown onto the floor in a heap. I dug through the pile until I found it. My old army green field jacket. The one I wore when I went fishing or did yard work. The one I wore to that barbecue because it was chilly. The pockets were turned inside out, but the jacket was otherwise intact. They had checked the pockets. They had checked the lining, but they did not check the seams. I picked it up. My fingers traced the heavy stitching of the collar. I felt it. A tiny hard lump no bigger than a fingernail embedded between the layers of fabric. It was imperceptible unless you were looking for it. I grabbed a shard of glass from a broken picture frame on the floor and sliced open the fabric. A small black micro SD card fell into my palm. It was cold and hard. I looked at it, and for the first time that night, I smiled. They destroyed my computer. They destroyed my home. But they missed the bullet that was going to end them. I put the card in my pocket and walked out the door. I needed a secure terminal, and I needed it now. Oscar's private office was not in a high-rise downtown. It was in the back room of a laundromat he owned on the east side of the city, a place off the grid where he kept his real work. The room was dark, lit only by the blue glow of an air-gapped laptop. I sat in the leather chair, my hand gripping the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white as the progress bar on the screen crawled forward. We were not looking at a neat, organized dossier. What Mia had hidden in my jacket was a digital graveyard of a terrified mind. There were 12 files. Most were audio recordings, just seconds long, time-stamped at odd hours like 3 or 4 in the morning, in tones. Oscar clicked the first one. Mia's voice filled the small room, barely a whisper over the static. They changed the passwords again. Brad is watching me. He took my phone. I think they are putting something in my tea. The recording ended with the sound of a door handle turning and a sharp intake of breath before cutting to black. I closed my eyes. I could feel her fear in that room. I could feel the walls closing in on her. She had been living in a war zone, and I had been oblivious at my barbecue grill. We went through the images next. They were photos taken of a computer screen, likely Brad's laptop when he left it unattended. They were blurry, angled hastily, and full of glare. Balance sheets, profit and loss statements for Caldwell Holdings. At first glance, it looked like standard corporate accounting. But then I saw the red ink. The company was bleeding money. They were leveraged to the hilt. Every asset they owned was mortgaged twice over. They were not billionaires. They were broke. But amidst the sea of debt, there was one recurring payment that made no sense. Oscar zoomed in on the image. It was a wire transfer executed on the first of every month for the last 6 months. $50,000. The recipient was listed as the Alpine Sanctuary in Zurich, Switzerland. That is not a hotel, Oscar said, his fingers flying across his separate keyboard to run a search. It is a long-term psychiatric facility. High security. No visitation rights without guardian approval. It is where wealthy European families send their problems to disappear. I stared at the screen. $50,000 a month. You do not pay that kind of money to cure someone. You pay that kind of money to keep them quiet, to keep them sedated, to keep them away from their father. They are not just trying to steal her inheritance, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They are trying to erase her existence. Once she is in Switzerland under Swiss medical laws, I will never get her out. The timing was perfect. Mia turns 29 next week. The trust fund unlocks. They send her away, declare her incompetent, and Brad signs the checks from a continent away while my daughter rots in a gilded cage. Oscar looked at me, his face grim. The payment schedule shows a final deposit made yesterday. It was labeled admission fee. Jack, this is not a future plan. This is happening now. I stood up. The chair fell over behind me. We needed to know when she was leaving. I did not need to check the flight logs. I felt it in my gut. They had the court order. They had the corrupt doctor. They were moving her, and I was stuck here looking at pictures while my daughter was being packaged for export. My burner phone vibrated against my hip, breaking the silence of the dark office. I did not recognize the number, but the text message made my blood run cold. Meet me behind the diner on 4th Street, alone. I can get her out. It was signed simply Brad. Oscar told me it was a trap. He told me that a man who lets his mother drug his wife does not suddenly grow a conscience in the middle of the night. But I was not thinking like a lawyer. I was thinking like a father who had just seen a wire transfer for a Swiss asylum. If there was even a 1% chance that Bradley Caldwell was ready to turn on his mother, I had to take it. I parked my truck 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance in the shadows. The alley behind the diner smelled of grease and old rain. Bradley was waiting by the dumpsters. He looked pathetic. His expensive cashmere coat was soaked through, and he was shivering violently. When he saw me, he did not back away. He collapsed against the brick wall and slid down to the ground, burying his face in his hands. He was sobbing. Not the polite crying of the upper class, but the ugly, desperate heaving of a man who has lost control. Jack, I am so sorry, he stammered, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I did not know about the Switzerland plan. Mom told me it was just a spa in Vermont. You have to believe me. I love Mia. I never wanted this. I stood over him, my hands deep in my pockets, clenching into fists. Part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside that weak spine there was a shred of decency. Where is she, Brad? I asked, my voice rough. Where are they keeping her right now? He stood up, wiping his nose on his sleeve. They have her at a safe house in the city. Mom is moving her tomorrow morning. Jack, they are going to lock her away forever. They threatened to take Lily from me if I did not sign the papers. I was scared. I am a coward, Jack. I admit it, but I cannot let them do this. He stepped closer to me, his hands grasping at my jacket. You can stop them, Jack. You are the only one they are afraid of. You need to do something drastic. You need to hurt them. Tell me what you are going to do. Tell me you will make them pay. The desperation in his voice triggered something in me. The image of Mia in that tub flashed in my mind. The image of this spineless worm signing her life away made me snap. I grabbed him by the lapels of his coat and slammed him hard against the brick wall. His head cracked against the masonry, but I did not care. I am not just going to hurt them, Brad, I snarled into his face. I am going to burn your entire world to the ground. And if you ever touch my daughter again, I will put a bullet in your head myself. Do you hear me? I will kill you." Brad stopped crying instantly. The fear vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, dead stare that sent a chill down my spine. He did not struggle. He did not beg. He just looked down at his chest. "Got it," he whispered. I frowned, confused by the sudden shift. I loosened my grip on his coat, and that was when I felt it. Under the wet cashmere taped to his sternum was a hard rectangular object. A wire. I ripped his coat open. A small digital recorder was taped to his shirt, its red light blinking steadily. But it was not just recording. The screen was glowing. It was streaming. "You son of a bitch," I breathed, backing away. Brad smoothed his coat and smiled. It was a smile that belonged to his mother. "That was a direct threat on my life, Jack," he said, his voice steady and mocking. "And since it was transmitted in real time to the server, my lawyers already have a copy. You just violated the restraining order and threatened to murder the court-appointed guardian." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Sent. I stood frozen in the alley rain, dripping from the brim of my hat. I had spent 40 years catching liars, but tonight I had let my anger blind me. I had walked right into the kill box. Brad turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the wet pavement, leaving me alone with the realization that I had just handed them the hammer to nail my own coffin shut. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. By the time I got back to the safety of my truck, the audio recording was already viral. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from news outlets and social media platforms. I opened one link and felt my stomach turn. It was a 10-second clip of our conversation in the alley. The context was gone. Bradley's confession about the drugging was gone. His taunts were gone. All that remained was my voice twisted with rage, screaming, "I will burn your entire world to the ground, and I will put a bullet in your head myself." The headline underneath read, "Deranged Father Threatens Grieving Husband Amidst Custody Battle." In the court of public opinion, I was no longer a worried parent. I was a violent, unhinged stalker. I tried to ignore the noise and drive, but when I pulled into a gas station to refuel, the pump screen flashed. "See cashier." I tried my credit card. Declined. I tried my debit card. Declined. I pulled out my phone and logged into my banking app. A red banner stretched across the top of the screen. Account frozen pending legal investigation regarding criminal threats. Patricia Caldwell moved fast. She knew that a man without money is a man without options. She was cutting off my supply lines, trying to starve me into submission before the sun even came up. She wanted me to run. She wanted me to panic and turn myself in. But I did not panic. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. If they wanted to play outside the law, then so would I. I looked over at the passenger seat where my old field jacket lay. The jacket Mia had hugged 2 weeks ago. The jacket I was wearing when I carried her into the hospital. I turned on the dome light and examined the fabric of the right shoulder. There, caught in the rough weave of the canvas, were several long strands of chestnut hair. Mia's hair. I picked them off carefully, my hands steady. This was biological evidence. If my theory was right, these strands contained the chemical signature of whatever poison they were using to keep her compliant. But I could not take this to the police. Sergeant Miller would lose it. I could not take it to a commercial lab. They would require a chain of custody form and a warrant. I was done with warrants. I started the engine. I knew a place. Biogen was a private forensic laboratory on the outskirts of the city. I used to audit them for insurance fraud cases years ago. I knew their security protocols better than their own night watchman. I knew that between 3 and 4 in the morning, the cleaning crew took their break and left the rear service entrance unmonitored. I parked the truck a mile away in a wooded area and hiked the rest of the distance on foot. The rain masked the sound of my boots on the pavement. When I reached the back of the sterile concrete building, the service door was locked, but the keypad was an old model. I remembered the override code I had flagged in my report 5 years ago. I prayed they had been too cheap to upgrade the system. I punched in the numbers. 9, 2, 4, 7. The light turned green. The lock clicked. I slipped inside the dark hallway, holding the only thing that could save my daughter in the palm of my hand. I was not an investigator anymore. I was a ghost, and I was going to find the truth. The mass spectrometer hummed a low, steady vibration that felt like it was drilling into my own skull. I stood in the shadows of the lab, waiting for the machine to break down the chemical composition of the 3 strands of hair I had stolen from my jacket. I knew what I was looking for, but I was praying to be wrong. I wanted to believe she was just depressed. I wanted to believe it was just stress. But when the printer spat out the toxicology report, the paper felt heavy in my hand. I scanned the columns of data, ignoring the standard traces of caffeine and cortisol. My finger stopped at the bottom of the list. Hyoscine hydrobromide. Scopolamine. In the street they call it devil's breath. It is not a recreational drug. It is a weapon. In high doses, it kills. But in low-controlled doses, like the ones found in Mia's hair, it does something far worse. It strips away a person's free will. It blocks the formation of memories and turns the victim into a compliant zombie who will do anything they are told. They had not just been drugging her to sleep. They had been chemically lobotomizing her so she would sign whatever papers they put in front of her. Rage is a funny thing. At a certain point, it stops being hot and turns cold. Absolute zero. I grabbed the report and drove straight to the precinct. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in colors that felt too cheerful for the hell I was living in. I did not wait for the front desk officer. I walked straight into Sergeant Miller's office and slammed the report onto his coffee-stained desk. "Read it," I said, my voice raspy from lack of sleep. Miller looked up from his donut. He did not look surprised. He looked annoyed. "You are supposed to be following a restraining order, Jack, not harassing police officers." I pointed at the paper. "That is a toxicology report from a forensic lab. My daughter is not psychotic, Miller. She is being poisoned. Scopolamine. They are keeping her docile so they can ship her off to Switzerland. This is attempted murder and kidnapping. Arrest them." Miller picked up the paper. He glanced at it for 2 seconds before dropping it into the trash can next to his desk. He did not even read the numbers. "You broke into Biogen last night, didn't you, Jack?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "We got a silent alarm notification. We chose not to send a car because we figured it was just a glitch. But now I see it was you." "It does not matter how I got it," I shouted, slamming my hand on the desk. "It is proof. It is fruit of the poisonous tree," Miller said smugly. "You obtained this evidence by committing a felony burglary. No judge will look at it. And frankly, neither will I. For all I know, you printed this at home. Get out of my office, Jack. Go home. If you come back here without a lawyer, I will book you for the break-in." I looked at the trash can where the truth about my daughter lay crumpled among coffee grounds and candy wrappers. I realized then that the badge on Miller's chest was just a piece of metal. It stood for nothing. The law was not broken. It was bought. I walked out of the station into the morning light, knowing that if I wanted justice, I was going to have to buy it back. I went back to the only place where the law could not touch me. The back room of Oscar's laundromat smelled of dryer sheets and cheap cigars, but right now it was the war room. Oscar was pacing the small floor space, his tie undone and his face pale. He knew I had struck out with the police. He knew we were running out of time. But I did not want to talk. I wanted to work. I sat down at the computer terminal and cracked my knuckles. For 40 years, I hunted men who tried to hide their sins in spreadsheets. I knew that every lie eventually leaves a paper trail, and I was going to find the one the Caldwells left behind. I stopped looking at the evidence of the crime and started looking for the motive. You do not drug a woman and kidnap her just because you hate her. You do it because she is worth something to you. I pulled up the public records for Caldwell Holdings. On the surface, they looked like pillars of the community. They had the charity galas and the ribbon cuttings. But when I dug into their credit history, the facade crumbled. The numbers on the screen were screaming in red. They had taken out 3 massive loans against the estate in the last 2 years. All of them were interest-only payments, and they had missed the last 4. Their construction company had been sued by 6 different subcontractors for non-payment. Patricia Caldwell was not a tycoon. She was a squatter in a mansion she no longer owned. They were insolvent. They were drowning in debt, and the water was rising fast. So why were they still spending money? Why were they paying $50,000 a month to a Swiss clinic if they could not even pay the gardener? They were betting on a sure thing. They were waiting for a payday that would wipe the slate clean. I closed the corporate files and opened a file I had not looked at in 20 years. My late wife's estate planning documents. Eleanor came from old money, the kind that is quiet and ironclad. When she passed, she left everything to Mia, but she was smart. She knew Mia was young and trusting. She locked the inheritance in a trust fund called the Reed Family Trust. I scrolled through the legalese, my eyes scanning for the distribution clauses, and there it was. Paragraph 4, Section B. The principal amount of $10 million plus accrued interest shall be released to the beneficiary upon her 29th birthday. I checked the calendar on the wall. Today was the 12th. Mia's birthday was the 19th. Next week. In exactly 7 days, my daughter was going to inherit a fortune that could pay off every debt the Caldwells had and still leave enough to buy their silence. But there was a catch. I read further down. In the event that the beneficiary is deemed mentally incompetent or incapacitated by a medical professional, the control of the trust shall be transferred to the legal guardian until such time as competency is restored. The room went silent. The hum of the computer fan seemed to fade away. It all made sense. The gaslighting, the isolation, the scopolamine. They did not need to kill her. Killing her would trigger an investigation. They needed her alive but broken. They needed a doctor to say she was crazy so they could step in as her guardians and drain the account dry. They were not sending her to Switzerland to get better. They were sending her there to wait out the clock while they spent her mother's legacy. They were stealing $10 million, and they were using my daughter's sanity as the key to the vault. I stared at the clause on the computer screen until the words burned into my retinas. Paragraph 4, Section B was not just legal jargon. It was the blueprint for a soul murder. It stated clearly that if the beneficiary was unable to manage their own affairs due to medical incapacitation, the court-appointed guardian would assume full fiduciary responsibility. I looked at the date on the calendar again. Mia turned 29 in 6 days. The trust was set to automatically dissolve and transfer the $10 million principal directly to her personal account on that day. Unless she was certified insane before the clock struck midnight. Oscar did the math out loud, his voice heavy with disgust. It is the perfect crime, Jack. If they kill her, the money might go to a secondary beneficiary or stay in the trust for her child. If they divorce her, they get nothing because of the prenup your wife insisted on. But if she is alive yet legally dead, they get everything. Bradley becomes the trustee. He gets to pay himself a management fee. He gets to use the funds for her care, which means paying the Caldwell family companies for services that do not exist. They could drain that account dry in 3 years, and the law would protect them the entire time. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the stale air in the room. I thought about the scopolamine. I thought about the way Mia looked in that bathtub. They were not trying to drive her crazy. They were manufacturing a diagnosis. The drugs were just a tool to make her fail the psychiatric evaluation. When she gets to Switzerland, the doctors there will see a woman who is disoriented, paranoid, and unable to speak for herself. They will stamp her file with whatever label Patricia bought and paid for. Schizophrenia. Early onset dementia. It does not matter. As long as the label sticks, the money flows. They do not want a funeral. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. A funeral is final. A funeral has questions. They want a vegetable. They want a breathing mannequin that they can park in a room in Zurich while they spend her mother's legacy on their crumbling empire. They are going to keep her barely alive, just enough to keep the checks clearing. It is a fate worse than death, Oscar. They are sentencing my daughter to an eternity of twilight just to pay off their bad loans. Oscar slammed his hand on the desk, making the coffee cups rattle. We have to stop the plane, Jack. We cannot let her leave U.S. soil. Once she lands in Switzerland under their privacy laws, we will never get her back. We have to file an injunction. No injunctions, I said, standing up. I was done with paper. I was done with judges who played golf with the enemy. I walked over to the whiteboard, where Oscar had sketched out the Caldwell's financial web. I picked up a red marker and drew a thick circle around their debts. They are doing this because they are broke. They are desperate. They are terrified of losing their status. Money is the only language they speak, so I am going to speak it back to them. I turned to Oscar. How much liquid cash can we get if I liquidate everything? My retirement, the house, the truck, everything. Oscar looked at me like I was crazy. Jack, that is your life savings. That is your safety net. I do not need a safety net, I said. I need a war chest. If they want to play the finance game, let's play. I am going to buy their debt, Oscar. I am going to buy the very ground they stand on. And when I walk into that party tomorrow night, I will not be a trespasser. I will be the landlord. And I am going to evict them from their own lives. Oscar managed to pull the address from an old payroll file that had been archived before the Caldwells wiped their servers. It led to the south end of the city, a place where the streetlights are shot out, and the police only show up to draw chalk outlines. I parked my truck 3 blocks away to avoid drawing attention and walked the rest of the distance in the rain. The building was a crumbling tenement with peeling paint and the smell of mildew seeping through the brick. This was where Elena, the former housekeeper, lived. She was the only person who had seen what happened behind the closed doors of the Caldwell estate before they fired her without severance. I knocked on apartment 4B. The sound echoed in the empty hallway. After a long minute, the door cracked open just an inch, held by a rusty security chain. A pair of terrified brown eyes stared out at me. I recognized her immediately. Elena was a kind woman who used to make tea for me when I visited Mia, but now she looked like a hunted animal. Mr. Reed, she whispered, her voice trembling. You should not be here. If they see you talking to me, they will hurt my family. Elena, I need your help, I said, keeping my voice low. I know what they are doing to Mia. I know about the medicine. She tried to shut the door, but I held it open with my boot. Please, Elena, my daughter is dying in there. I know you saw something. I saw nothing, she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. Please, go away. My son is in trouble. I cannot deal with the Caldwells right now. She slammed the door in my face and bolted the lock. I stood there for a moment, defeated. I turned to leave, but as I reached the stairwell, I heard a commotion from the alleyway below. Shouting, the sound of a fist hitting flesh, and a young man pleading for mercy. I looked over the railing. 3 men were surrounding a skinny kid in a mechanic's uniform. One of them was holding a tire iron. It was a classic shakedown. I recognized the kid from the photos in Elena's living room. Her son. I did not think. I moved. I took the stairs 3 at a time. The thug with the tire iron had his arm raised, ready to break the kid's leg. I hit him from behind with the full weight of my body, tackling him into the dumpster. The metal clanged loudly. The other two spun around, surprised to see an old man in a field jacket. They pulled knives. "You made a mistake, Grandpa," one of them sneered. I did not answer. I broke the first guy's wrist before he could stand up. I took the tire iron from his screaming hand and stood up to face the other two. I did not hold the weapon like an amateur. I held it like I was ready to paint the alley with their blood. I had 40 years of rage inside me, and right now these low-level punks were the only outlet I had. "Walk away," I growled, "or I will make sure you never walk again." They looked at my eyes. They saw something there that scared them more than prison. They grabbed their injured friend and ran. Elena's son was shaking on the wet pavement. I helped him up just as Elena came running out of the building, screaming his name. She checked him for injuries, hugging him tight. Then she looked at me. She looked at the tire iron in my hand, and then at the retreating gangsters. She realized something in that moment. She realized that I was more dangerous than the people she was afraid of. "Come inside, Mr. Reed," she said, wiping her tears. 5 minutes later, we were sitting in her small kitchen. She went into her bedroom and came back with a cheap, prepaid smartphone with a cracked screen. "I recorded it because I was scared," she said, handing it to me. "I thought if I had proof, they would pay me what they owed me. But then I got too scared to use it." "Take it. Save your daughter." I powered on the phone. There was one video file in the gallery. I pressed play, and what I saw made my knuckles turn white. It was the smoking gun I had been praying for. We plugged the cracked smartphone into Oscar's main monitor, using a frayed cable. The screen flickered to life, showing a timestamp from 3 weeks ago. The angle was low and tilted, likely filmed from a phone propped up behind a toaster or a stack of cookbooks. It was the Caldwell kitchen, a massive space of stainless steel and marble that looked more like an operating theater than a place to eat family meals. Mia was sitting at the island. Even in the grainy footage, I could see the tremors in her hands. She was wearing a bathrobe and staring at a spot on the counter with vacant, glassy eyes. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. Then Patricia walked into the frame. She was not the poised socialite the public saw. She was a predator. She held a small crystal vial filled with a liquid that glowed an electric blue. "Drink it," Patricia commanded, her voice distorted, but clear enough to chill my blood. Mia shook her head slowly. "No. It makes me forget. Please." "I do not want to forget Lily anymore." Patricia did not argue. She did not negotiate. She lashed out with the speed of a viper. Her open palm connected with Mia's cheek with a crack that echoed through the computer speakers. Mia's head snapped back, and she slumped forward, sobbing quietly. Patricia grabbed a handful of my daughter's hair, yanking her head back until her neck was exposed. She forced the vial to Mia's lips. "It is for your own good," Patricia hissed. "You are sick, Mia. This helps you rest. Now swallow, or I will have Trent take you down to the basement again." Mia choked and sputtered, but she swallowed the blue liquid. A moment later, she slumped against the counter, her eyes rolling back into her head. The video ended. I sat there in the dark office, listening to the hum of the hard drive. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like it was burning my skin. I stood up and paced the small room, my boots heavy on the linoleum. "We have them, Oscar. That is assault. That is forced administration of a controlled substance. We can call the FBI right now." Oscar did not move. He was staring at the frozen image of Patricia holding the vial. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I knew meant bad news. "We cannot use it, Jack," he said quietly. "What do you mean we cannot use it? It is right there in high definition." "It is inadmissible," Oscar said, turning his chair to face me. "Elena recorded this in a private residence without the consent of the parties involved. In this state, that is a felony. If we take this to a judge, not only will they throw it out, but they will arrest Elena. and Patricia's lawyers will argue that the video is a deep fake or that the liquid was just herbal tea. Without the bottle itself for testing it is just a grainy movie. It will take months to authenticate, and by then Mia will be in Switzerland. I slammed my fist against the wall. So it is worthless. My daughter is being tortured, and the proof is worthless because of a technicality. Oscar stood up and put a hand on my shoulder. It is worthless in a court of law, Jack. But in the court of public opinion or in a boardroom negotiation, it is nuclear. This video is not evidence for a judge. It is ammunition for us. It proves we are right. It proves they are monsters. We cannot use it to arrest them tonight, but we can use it to destroy them when the time is right. Keep it safe. When we walk into that house tomorrow, we are not going in with a warrant. We are going in with a sledgehammer. The printer in the corner of the dark office whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet of paper that sealed my daughter's fate. Oscar snatched it from the tray before the ink was even dry. His eyes scanned the lines of text, and his shoulders slumped. It was the confirmation we had been dreading. A flight manifest for a private charter jet departing from Teterboro Airport at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. The tail number belonged to a shell company registered to the Caldwell estate. The destination was Zurich, Switzerland. Oscar tossed the paper onto the desk. "It is a medical transport," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "They have listed her as a high-risk patient requiring immediate specialized care abroad. They have the doctor's signature. They have the court order. Jack, once the wheels of that Gulfstream touch down on Swiss soil, she is gone. The facility they are sending her to is a black hole. It is a fortress designed to keep people in and questions out. Under Swiss privacy laws, we will not even be able to confirm she is there, let alone visit her. You will never see her again." I stared at the flight plan. The letters seemed to blur together. I saw the timeline of my daughter's life shrinking down to less than 24 hours. Tomorrow night. They were not just stealing her inheritance. They were erasing her existence. They were shipping her across the Atlantic like damaged cargo so they could live in luxury on her dime. I felt the last shred of faith I had in the system dissolve. I had tried to play by the rules. I had gone to the police. I had hired a lawyer. I had gathered evidence. And at every turn the Caldwells had used their money to build a wall I could not climb. But walls work both ways. If they could use money to buy the law, then I could use money to burn it down. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked street. I was done asking for permission. I was done waiting for a judge to find his conscience. "Stop typing, Oscar," I said, my voice calm and cold. "We are done filing motions. We are done looking for loopholes." Oscar looked up, confused. "Jack, if we do not file an emergency injunction by morning, she leaves." "Let her leave," I said, turning to face him. "Or at least let them think she is leaving. You told me earlier that the Caldwells are broke. You told me they are drowning in debt, and this inheritance is their only life raft." Oscar nodded slowly. "They are insolvent. If they do not get control of that trust fund in a week, the banks will foreclose on everything." "Good," I said. "Then we are not going to fight them in court. We are going to fight them at the bank. I want you to pull up my entire portfolio, my retirement accounts, the equity in my house, my life insurance policies, everything I have saved for 40 years. Oscar's eyes went wide. "Jack, what are you doing?" "I am cashing out," I said, walking back to the desk. "I am going to liquidate every asset I own. I am going to beg, borrow, and steal every cent I can get my hands on. I do not want a lawyer anymore, Oscar. I want a broker. I am going to buy their debt. I am going to become the one thing Patricia Caldwell cannot ignore. I am going to be her landlord. And tomorrow night, instead of watching my daughter fly away, I am going to evict them from their own lives." I walked out of that laundromat, and I did not go home to sleep. I went home to say goodbye. My house on Elm Street was the only thing I had left of my wife, Eleanor. It was where we brought Mia home from the hospital. It was where I taught her to ride a bike in the driveway. It was the place where I thought I would take my last breath. But as I stood in the living room looking at the slashed sofa and the broken drywall from the break-in, I realized something profound. A house is just wood and stone. A home is the people inside it. And my person was being held hostage in a mansion across town. I picked up the phone and called a number from a billboard I usually ignored. One of those predatory investors who buy houses for cash in any condition. It was 4 a.m, but greed never sleeps. The investor met me there in an hour. He looked at the damage. He looked at the desperate old man standing in the rain. He smelled blood in the water. He offered me 60 cents on the dollar. I did not haggle. I did not negotiate. I signed the deed on the hood of his car while the ink smeared in the drizzle. I watched him wire the funds, and just like that, 30 years of memories were converted into a routing number. But it was not enough. I drove to the bank the second the doors opened at 9. I sat down with a young financial advisor who looked terrified as I demanded he liquidate my entire portfolio, my 401k, my IRA, my life insurance policies. He tried to warn me about the tax penalties. He tried to tell me I was destroying my retirement and that I would be destitute in 5 years. I told him I did not plan on retiring. I planned on winning. I signed the withdrawal forms with a steady hand. I walked out with a cashier's check that represented every overtime shift I ever worked and every vacation I never took. It was still not enough to buy a corporate debt of that magnitude. I needed leverage. I needed the kind of money that does not ask questions. I went to see a man I used to investigate in the 90s, a hard money lender who operated out of the back of a pawn shop on the harbor. I put my truck title on the counter. I signed a promissory note with an interest rate that was technically illegal. If I failed to pay, he would not send a collection agency, he would send a hitman. I did not care. The only thing that mattered was the balance in my war chest. By noon, I was back at the laundromat. I threw a stack of certified checks onto Oscar's desk. $2 million. It was everything I had in the world. It was my past, present, and future liquidated into paper. Oscar looked at the pile and then he opened his briefcase. He pulled out another stack of checks, thick and heavy. $3 million, he said quietly. I called in every favor, Jack. Every client whose business we saved in the last 20 years. Every fraud victim we helped recover assets. They chipped in. We have $5 million. We are not just buying their debt. We are buying their souls. The glass doors of First City Bank slid open, and I walked into the air-conditioned silence of the lobby. I was not there to make a deposit. I was there to perform a hostile takeover. I had an appointment with Marcus Sterling, the Vice President of Distressed Assets. He was a man known for his ruthlessness, but today I was counting on it. I knew that his bank held the primary mortgage on the Caldwell estate and the majority of their business loans. I also knew that for the last 6 months, Patricia Caldwell had been dodging his calls. Sterling was sitting behind a desk that looked like it cost more than my first house. He did not get up to shake my hand. He looked at my wet field jacket and the mud on my boots with open disdain. "Mr. Reed," he said, checking his watch, "you said you had a solution to my Caldwell problem. You have 5 minutes before I call security." I did not sit down. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the certified check for $5 million. I slid it across the polished mahogany surface. It was a small piece of paper, but it carried the weight of my entire life. "I am not here to negotiate a payment plan," I said, my voice steady. "I am here to buy the note. All of it. The mortgage on the mansion. The construction loans. The lines of credit. I want to purchase the entire debt portfolio of Caldwell Holdings." Sterling looked at the check. Then he looked at me. His eyes narrowed. "The face value of that debt is nearly $18 million, Mr. Reed. $5 million is an insult. $18 million is a fantasy." I countered, leaning over the desk. We both know the Caldwells are insolvent. Their construction projects are stalled. Their creditors are circling. If you try to foreclose through the courts, it will take you 2 years and thousands in legal fees, and by the time you get the property, it will be stripped bare. Patricia will fight you every step of the way. Or you can take $5 million of cold, hard cash right now and wash your hands of the entire mess. Sterling picked up the check. He held it up to the light. He was doing the math. He knew I was right. In the world of bad debt, 30 cents on the dollar was a gift. He tapped the check against his chin. Why, he asked. Why would a retired insurance investigator throw his life savings into a sinking ship? You know you will never recover this money. I do not want the money, I said. I want the leverage. I want the right to foreclose. Today. Sterling smiled. It was a shark's smile. He understood perfectly. He did not care about my motives, he only cared about his balance sheet. He pressed a button on his intercom. Bring me the transfer documents for the Caldwell account, and get the notary in here. 20 minutes later, I walked out of the bank with a thick leather folder tucked under my arm. The rain had finally stopped, but the storm was just beginning. I stopped on the sidewalk and opened the folder. Inside was the assignment of mortgage and the transfer of note. My name was typed on the line where the bank used to be. I ran my thumb over the raised seal of the notary. It was done. Technically, I was now the owner of the roof over Patricia's head. I owned the bed she slept in and the gates she locked me out of. I was no longer a helpless father begging for access to his child. I was the creditor. And in America, the creditor is king. I pulled out my phone and called Oscar. Tell the team to get ready, I said. We are not going to the party as guests. We are going to the party as the new owners. Meet me at the estate in 1 hour. And bring the eviction notice. I stood in front of the small cracked mirror in the back of the laundromat, stripping off the damp field jacket that smelled of rain and desperation. I looked at the man in the reflection. He looked tired. His eyes were rimmed with red, and his gray stubble was thick on his chin. But the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, mechanical precision. For the last 24 hours, I had been reacting to their moves, playing their game by their rules. I had been the frantic father banging on the gates. But that man was gone now. The man looking back at me was the man who used to bring down insurance fraud rings worth millions. I was not going to a party to beg for my daughter. I was going to a closing. I reached for the garment bag Oscar had retrieved from my storage unit. I unzipped it slowly. Inside was my charcoal gray wool suit. It was 10 years old, but it was tailored to fit like armor. I put on the white starched shirt, buttoning it all the way to the neck. I tied the silk tie, pulling the knot tight until it felt like a noose. Then I slipped on the jacket. It still smelled faintly of old courtrooms and expensive scotch, the scent of my past life. I smoothed the lapels. I did not look like a retiree anymore. I looked like an auditor. I looked like consequences. I walked over to the desk where my Sig Sauer lay heavy and black on the blotter. I picked it up, feeling the cold steel against my palm. It was a comforting weight. It was the easy way out. A gun commands respect instantly, but it also brings the police and the handcuffs. A gun makes you a criminal. I ejected the magazine and racked the slide, clearing the chamber. I placed the weapon back in the safe and locked the door. I did not need bullets tonight. I had something far more lethal. I picked up the leather briefcase. It was worn at the corners, scuffed from years of being thrown onto tables in interrogation rooms. I opened it. Inside, neatly organized in plastic sleeves, were the instruments of the Caldwell's destruction. The assignment of mortgage, the transfer of note, the notice of default, and on the very top, the notice of immediate foreclosure and eviction based on the acceleration clause I had triggered an hour ago. These papers were not just legal documents. They were a nuclear option. A gun can kill a person, but these papers could kill a legacy. They could erase a name from society. I snapped the latches shut. The sound was like a gavel striking a bench. I walked out of the office and into the cool evening air. The storm had finally broken, leaving the streets slick and black under the streetlights. Oscar was waiting by the curb, leaning against a black sedan. He did not say a word. He just opened the back door for me. I slid into the leather seat and placed the briefcase on my lap. I rested my hands on it, feeling the power vibrating through the leather. I looked out the window as the city lights blurred past. We were heading north toward the hills where the rich people lived, toward the fortress that Patricia Caldwell thought was impenetrable. She was expecting a fight. She was expecting shouting and maybe even violence. She had no idea that she had already lost the war before I even stepped foot on her property. "Drive," I said to the driver. "The landlord is coming for an inspection." The driveway was lined with Bentleys and Porsches glistening under the floodlights like beetles in a jewelry box. The Caldwell estate looked like a castle from a fairy tale, but I knew it was really a dungeon painted in gold leaf. Inside the ballroom was packed with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos who were drinking champagne that cost more than my monthly pension. At the front of the room, standing on a raised platform decorated with white roses, was Patricia Caldwell. She held a microphone in one manicured hand and a tissue in the other, dabbing at dry eyes. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her voice trembled with practiced emotion as she spoke to the crowd. "It breaks a mother's heart to make these hard decisions," she said, sniffing delicately. "Sending our beloved Mia away to Switzerland is the most painful thing we have ever had to do. But we must prioritize her mental health. We are sacrificing everything to ensure she gets the best care possible." The crowd murmured in sympathy. They saw a saint. I saw a predator using her victims' suffering to solicit donations for a foundation that probably funneled money right back into her own pocket. "Mia is so fragile," Patricia continued, her voice breaking perfectly on the word fragile. "She needs the peace of the mountains, the isolation. It is costing us a fortune, but can you really put a price on family?" Brad stood next to her, looking somber and tragic, playing the role of the grieving husband to perfection. It was sickening. They were toasting to their crime. I watched all of this from the back seat of the sedan as we rolled up to the main security checkpoint. The irony was thick enough to choke on. She was talking about sacrifice while wearing diamond earrings bought with credit she did not have. She was talking about love while her son was prepping a private jet to exile his wife to a living hell. The car stopped. A large man in a black suit stepped in front of the vehicle, raising his hand. He was not the usual gate guard. He was private security hired specifically for tonight. He looked like he chewed rocks for breakfast. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was crisp, and the music from the house drifted down the lawn, mocking the gravity of what was about to happen. I adjusted my tie and walked toward the entrance. The guard stepped into my path, crossing his massive arms. "Private event, sir," he rumbled, his voice devoid of warmth. "Invitation only. And I do not see your name on the list." I did not stop walking until I was inches from his chest. I did not look at his invite list. I looked straight into his eyes. "I do not need an invitation," I said, my voice low and level. "I am not a guest." "Then you are trespassing," he said, reaching for the earpiece coiled behind his ear. "Turn around and leave, or I will remove you physically." He reached out to grab my shoulder, his fingers digging into the wool of my suit. It was the same mistake Trent had made. He judged the book by its cover. He saw a gray-haired man with a briefcase and assumed I was harmless. He did not know that the leather bag in my hand contained a weapon far more dangerous than a gun. He did not know that in about 30 seconds he was not going to be enforcing the rules anymore. He was going to be looking for a new job. The security guard's hand clamped down on my shoulder like a vice. He was expecting me to struggle or maybe take a swing at him like a desperate drunk. That is what he was trained for. He knew how to handle physical threats, but he did not know how to handle a man who was armed with a federal foreclosure notice. I did not flinch. I did not try to pull away. I simply looked at his hand and then up at his eyes with a look of absolute boredom. "Remove your hand," I said, my voice barely rising above a whisper, "or I will have your license revoked by morning." He hesitated just for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I shrugged his hand off my shoulder and set my briefcase down on the hood of the car. The sound of the brass latches clicking open was sharp and loud in the quiet driveway. I pulled out a single document. It was not the eviction notice. It was the assignment of debt certified by the bank an hour ago. I held it up so the landscape lighting illuminated the embossed seal. "Do you know what this is?" I asked him. He squinted at the paper. "It is a legal document," he grunted. "So what?" "It is a transfer of ownership," I explained, keeping my tone conversational. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, Caldwell Holdings defaulted us their primary mortgage. The bank sold the note to me. That means I own this house. I own the driveway. I own the gate. And most importantly, I own the contract for the security detail you are currently working for." I watched his face change. The aggression melted away, replaced by confusion. He looked at the paper again, reading the lines of text that confirmed Jackson Reed as the secured creditor. He looked at the signature of the bank vice president. He knew that signature. "The Caldwells are insolvent." I continued driving the nail into the coffin. "They cannot pay you. The check they wrote for your services tonight is going to bounce. But I can, pay you. In fact, I am, the only one who can pay you. So you have a choice to make right now. You can stop the legal owner of this property from entering his own building, which is a felony, or you can step aside and keep your job. Who do you want to work for? The bankrupt fraud inside, or the man holding the deed?" The guard looked at the house where the music was blaring and the champagne was flowing. Then he looked at me. He was a mercenary. His loyalty was to the paycheck, not the person. He took a step back. He reached up and touched his earpiece. "Stand down," he said into his radio. "Let him through. The gentleman has clearance." He stepped aside, clearing the path to the massive oak front doors. He even opened the door for me. I picked up my briefcase and walked past him without saying thank you. I did not need to thank him. He was just an employee doing his job. I stepped into the foyer. The noise of the party hit me like a physical wave. Laughter, clinking glasses, and a string quartet playing Mozart. It was a scene of obscene wealth and comfort. I stood there for a moment, adjusting my cuffs, feeling the weight of the moment. I was no longer on the outside looking in. I was inside the belly of the beast, and I was about to give it a fatal case of indigestion. I gripped the handle of my briefcase tighter and walked toward the ballroom. The double doors to the grand ballroom swung open with a heavy groan that seemed to cut right through the delicate strains of the string quartet. I stepped onto the plush carpet, and for a moment, the only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and slow in my ears. The room was a sea of black ties and designer silk, a congregation of the city's most powerful people drinking to the health of a family that was rotten to the core. The silence started at the back of the room where I stood and rolled forward like a tidal wave. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. 200 heads turned to look at the intruder in the gray wool suit standing in the archway with a battered leather briefcase. I did not look at the guests. I did not care about their judgment or their whispers. My eyes were locked on the stage where Patricia Caldwell stood bathed in the spotlight. She saw me immediately. A lesser woman might have flinched. A guilty woman might have looked for an exit. But Patricia was a narcissist of the highest order. She did not see a threat. She saw a prop. She saw an opportunity to cement her narrative of the grieving victim dealing with a dangerous lunatic. She smoothed the front of her gown, and a slow, pitying smile spread across her face. It was the kind of smile you give to a misbehaving child or a rabid dog before you put it down. She raised the microphone to her lips, her eyes sparkling with malicious delight. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so terribly sorry for this interruption," she purred, her voice amplified and dripping with false sweetness. "It seems that poor Jack has forgotten to take his medication again. The grief over Mia's condition has simply broken his mind. Please do not be alarmed, security is on the way." The crowd murmured a collective sound of sympathetic outrage. They looked at me with fear and disgust, seeing exactly what she wanted them to see. A crazy old man crashing a charity gala. I did not speak. I just kept walking down the center aisle, my steps heavy and rhythmic. Then Trent moved. He had been standing in the shadows near the champagne bar, nursing a bruise on his ego along with his drink. He saw me and his face twisted into a mask of drunken rage. He wanted redemption for the humiliation I had dealt him the night before. He wanted to be the hero in front of his mother's friends. He threw his glass on the floor, shattering it, and charged at me. He was fast for a big man, but he was sloppy. He telegraphed his move from a mile away, pulling his arm back for a haymaker that was meant to take my head off. I stopped walking. I waited. When he was just a foot away, he lunged, putting all his weight behind the punch. I did not block it. I did not fight him. I simply pivoted on my left heel and stepped 6 inches to the side. It is a simple principle of leverage and momentum. When a charging bull misses the matador, it cannot stop. Trent's fist hit nothing but empty air. His momentum carried him forward, his heavy body stumbling past me. He flailed his arms trying to find balance, but it was too late. He crashed headlong into the massive tower of crystal champagne flutes that had been painstakingly stacked in a pyramid. The sound was deafening. 1,000 glasses shattered at once, a cacophony of breaking crystal that sounded like a chandelier falling from the sky. Champagne exploded outward in a frothy wave, soaking the guests in the front row. Trent landed face down in the wreckage, groaning amidst the shards and the puddles of expensive wine. The room went dead silent. I brushed a speck of glass off my lapel and looked up at Patricia. Her smile was gone. I stepped over the wreckage of the champagne tower, my boots crunching on the broken crystal. Trent was writhing on the floor, his tuxedo soaked in alcohol, and his ego shattered, but I did not look down. He was yesterday's problem. My eyes were locked on the woman standing on the stage, frozen like a statue of ice. Patricia Caldwell had spent her entire life controlling every room she entered, but as I climbed the short staircase to the platform, she looked small. She looked terrified. She was gripping the microphone so hard, her knuckles were white, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I reached out and gently took the microphone from her hand. She did not resist. She was in shock. Her fingers were cold and clammy. I could smell the fear radiating off her, mixed with her expensive perfume. I turned to face the crowd. 200 pairs of eyes were staring at me, waiting for the punchline, waiting for security to drag the crazy man away. But security was not coming. I tapped the microphone twice. The sound thumped through the massive speakers, echoing off the vaulted ceiling and silencing the last few whispers in the back of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and steady, "I apologize for the interruption, and I am sorry about the wine, but I am afraid this event has been canceled." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. People looked at each other, unsure if this was part of the show. You see, I continued holding up the leather folder in my other hand. There has been a change in management. As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, the mortgage on this estate has been foreclosed. The title has been transferred. You are all currently standing in my living room. And frankly, I am tired. I want to go to bed. So the party is over. Please finish your drinks and vacate the premises immediately. For 3 seconds, there was absolute dead silence. It was the sound of a reality shattering. The elite of the city could not process what they were hearing. They looked from me to Patricia, waiting for her to laugh, waiting for her to tell them it was a joke. But Patricia did not laugh. The shock broke, and the rage took over. She lunged at me, snatching at the microphone, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "He is lying," she shrieked, her voice cracking without the amplification. "Do not listen to him. He is insane. This is my house. I have lived here for 30 years. Security. Where is security? Get this man off my stage." She looked frantically toward the doors, searching for the guards. But the guards were standing by the exit, their arms crossed, watching the show. They knew who signed their checks now. They did not move. "This is my home," Patricia screamed again, grabbing my lapels and shaking me. "You are a nobody. You are a bankrupt old man. You cannot buy me out. I am Patricia Caldwell." I looked down at her hands on my cheap wool suit. I did not push her away. I just looked at her with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. "You were Patricia Caldwell," I said quietly enough that only she could hear. "Now you are just a tenant, and you are being evicted." Patricia was still clawing at my jacket, screaming about her rights and her legacy, when I looked over her shoulder and nodded at the tech booth. Oscar had made his way to the audio-visual control center near the back of the room. He pushed the terrified DJ aside and plugged his laptop into the main system. The sentimental slideshow of Mia playing on the massive projection screen behind us flickered and died. The image of my daughter's smiling face was replaced instantly by a document that was far less flattering. It was projected 10 feet tall for everyone to see. The header was bold and black. Notice of default. Below it were columns of numbers that told the true story of the Caldwell empire. 6 months of missed mortgage payments. 3 separate liens against the property from unpaid contractors. And a bottom line that showed a negative balance in the millions. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath from 200 people who realized they had been toasting to a corpse. Patricia turned around slowly. Her hands fell from my lapel. She stared at the screen, reading her own financial obituary. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The denial was dying in her throat. Oscar stepped out from the booth holding a microphone. His voice was calm, professional, and utterly devastating. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, addressing her across the room. "As you can see from the bank records projected above you, your company has been insolvent for over half a year. First City Bank grew tired of your excuses. At 4:15 today, they sold the entirety of your debt portfolio to my client, Mr. Jackson Reed." Oscar pressed a button on his laptop. The image on the screen changed. It was the transfer document showing my signature next to the bank seal. "You owe Mr. Reed $18 million, Oscar continued. "And under the terms of the commercial loan agreement, Mr. Reed has exercised his right to activate the acceleration clause." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Most of them knew money, but they did not know the dirty mechanics of foreclosure. I took the microphone back from Patricia's trembling hand to explain it to them. "It means I am calling the loan," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "It means you have to pay me $18 million in cash right now, or you forfeit the collateral. And since I know you do not have $18 million, I am taking the collateral." I swept my arm across the room, gesturing to the crystal chandeliers, the silk drapes, and the marble floors. "I am taking the house, Patricia. I am taking the furniture. I am taking the cars in the driveway. It is all mine." Patricia swayed. She grabbed the podium to steady herself. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. She looked out at the audience, at her friends and rivals. She saw the judgment in their eyes. She saw the disgust. She realized that the facade she had spent 30 years building had just been demolished in 30 seconds. She was not the queen of society anymore. She was a fraud, exposed in high definition. Her knees buckled, and she slumped against the podium, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor in a puddle of expensive silk. Patricia was barely a heap of silk on the floor, but her son did not even look at her. Bradley Caldwell did what rats always do when the ship hits the rocks. He scurried. He looked at the screen where his bankruptcy was glowing in high definition, and then he looked at me. He did not see a father-in-law anymore. He saw a lifeline. He saw the man holding the checkbook. The arrogance he had shown me in the alley 24 hours ago was gone. The sneer was replaced by a desperate, sweaty panic that made him look like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. He scrambled up the steps of the stage, stepping right over the legs of his sobbing mother without a second glance. He rushed toward me, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, his face twisted into a pathetic imitation of a smile. He was sweating so profusely that his expensive makeup was running down his collar. He stopped just inches from me, breathing hard, smelling of fear and stale champagne. "Jack, please," he stammered, his voice pitching high. "You have to listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. You do not want to ruin us. Think about the reputation of the family." I stared at him. I did not blink. I let the silence stretch out until the entire room was leaning in to hear what he would say next. "I am on your side, Jack." He continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, trying to create a bond that did not exist. It was all her idea, all. He pointed a shaking finger at his mother on the floor. "She made me do it. She controls the money. She controls everything. I wanted to help Mia. I swear to you, I am a victim here too." He reached out as if to embrace me. He actually tried to hug me. "Dad, please. We are family. You cannot destroy your own family." The word dad hung in the air like a foul smell. It triggered a memory of the alleyway. I remembered the way he smiled when he showed me the wire taped to his chest. I remembered how he laughed when he sent the recording to the police. I remembered the bruises on Mia's wrists, the fingerprints of a man who claimed to be a victim. I took a half step back, letting his hands grasp at empty air. I looked him up and down, dissecting him with my eyes. I saw a man with no spine, no honor, and no soul. A man who would sell his own mother to save his leased sports car. "You called me Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "But yesterday in the alley, you called me a deranged stalker. You wore a wire to frame me. You signed the papers to commit my daughter to an asylum so you could steal her money. You held her down while your mother poured poison down her throat." Brad's face went pale. He opened his mouth to argue, to spin another lie, but I cut him off. "Do not use that word with me again. You are not my family. You are a parasite, and I have just cut off the blood supply." I leaned in close so that only he could see the absolute zero in my eyes. "Family protects each other, Brad. Family would die for each other. Family does not drug each other." I turned away from Brad, leaving him shivering in his own sweat. He was finished, but I was not done. There was one more lie that needed to be buried forever. I looked up at the projection booth and nodded to Oscar. He knew what to do. The financial ruin on the massive screen faded to black. For a heart-stopping second, the ballroom was plunged into darkness and silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the high-definition projector warming up for its final act. Then a new image flickered to life. It was not a polished slideshow. It was shaky, grainy footage filmed from a phone hidden behind a stack of cookbooks. The sound hissed through the speakers first, then voices. It was unmistakably the Caldwell kitchen, a cavern of marble and steel that now looked like a torture chamber. There was Mia sitting on a stool in a bathrobe. Even on the big screen you could see the vacant look in her eyes. She looked like a ghost haunting her own body. And there was Patricia standing over her, holding a vial of glowing blue liquid. The entire ballroom held its breath. 200 of the city's elite watched in horrified silence as Patricia on the screen raised her hand and slapped my daughter across the face. The sound of the impact cracked through the room louder than the champagne tower falling. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered shock. They were used to white-collar crime, they were accustomed to stolen money, but this was raw, physical abuse. They watched as Patricia on screen grabbed Mia by her hair, yanking her head back viciously. They heard Mia begging, saying she did not want to forget her daughter anymore. And they heard Patricia's cruel reply, threatening to lock her in the basement before forcing the poison down her throat. I let it play. I let them see the monster hiding behind the charity gala gown. That is not mental illness, I said into the microphone, my voice echoing over the footage of my daughter choking. That is scopolamine. It is a drug used to erase memory and destroy free will. She was not sick, people. She was being slowly poisoned by the woman standing right here. A strangled animalistic scream erupted from the floor near my feet. Patricia had seen the undeniable truth projected 10 feet high. The reality of her total exposure snapped the last thread of her sanity. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wild with panic and rage. No, she shrieked, her voice unrecognizable. Turn it off. It is a lie. It is a fake. Stop looking at it. She lunged toward the back of the stage, clawing at the air, trying to physically block the beam of light from the projector with her hands. She was not a poised socialite anymore. She was a cornered rat. In her blind desperation, she caught the heel of her expensive shoe on the hem of her torn silk gown. She did not even have time to cry out. She went down hard, crashing face first into the base of the podium and crumpling into a heap on the stage floor, illuminated by the flickering image of her own crimes. Patricia lay on the stage, a broken doll in a puddle of ruined silk, trying to push herself up, but her legs refused to cooperate. The room was silent save for her ragged breathing and the hum of the projector fan. The guests were frozen, staring at the woman they had worshipped 10 minutes ago, now revealed as a monster. But the silence did not last. From outside the heavy oak doors came a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. Sirens. Not the lazy wail of a local patrol car coming to break up a noise complaint, but the sharp, aggressive chirp of a coordinated raid. Blue and red lights washed over the windows, pulsing against the glass. Patricia looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. She thought it was Sergeant Miller. She thought her friend had come to save her, to arrest the crazy intruder and sweep this whole nightmare under the rug. She started to smile, a twisted, bloody grin. Thank God, she whispered. The police. Arrest him. I looked down at her and shook my head. You really do not get it, do you, Patricia? I did not call the police. The local police work for you. I called someone who does not care about your charity galas or your golf handicap. The double doors at the back of the ballroom exploded open. They did not swing. They were hit with a battering ram. Splinters of expensive wood flew across the carpet. A dozen men and women poured into the room. They were not wearing the beige uniforms of the local precinct. They were wearing navy blue windbreakers with bright yellow letters emblazoned on the back and chest. FBI. Panic rippled through the crowd as the guests realized this was a federal raid. People dropped their champagne glasses and backed away, raising their hands instinctively. But the agents ignored them. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of a wolf pack zeroing in on a wounded deer. They marched down the center aisle, their boots thudding on the carpet, weapons drawn but pointed low. Oscar stood up in the projection booth and crossed his arms. He had bypassed the corrupt local jurisdiction entirely. He had sent the bank fraud evidence directly to the Department of Justice field office. When you steal $18 million from an FDIC-insured bank, it is not a civil matter anymore. It is a federal crime. The lead agent, a tall woman with eyes like flint, walked straight to the stage. She did not stop to ask questions. She did not ask for ID. She knew exactly who she was looking for. She stepped up onto the platform and loomed over Patricia. Patricia Caldwell, the agent, announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Patricia scrambled backward, crabbing across the floor. "No, you cannot touch me. I am Patricia Caldwell. This is a mistake. Call the governor. Call my lawyer." The agent did not blink. She reached down and grabbed Patricia's wrist, twisting it behind her back with practiced ease. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound in the world. Click, click, click. Patricia screamed. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of disbelief. She was being cuffed in her own ballroom in front of the very people she tried so hard to impress. The cold steel of the bracelets dug into her skin, pressing against the diamond bracelets she had bought with stolen money. The agent hauled her to her feet. Patricia's gown was torn, her hair was wild, and her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. She looked out at the sea of faces, hoping for someone to intervene. But nobody moved. Nobody said a word. The Queen was dead. The ballroom was a cacophony of shouting agents and gasping guests. But amidst the noise, I heard a sound that stopped my heart cold. It was a high-pitched scream of pure terror. I spun around, scanning the room. While the FBI agents were focused on dragging Patricia off the stage and securing the exits, they had lost track of the one variable I should have neutralized permanently. Trent. He was not on the floor anymore. In the confusion, he had scrambled to his feet. He was desperate. He was a bully who had lost his power, and like any cornered animal, he was looking for a shield. He found one near the service entrance where the nanny had foolishly brought my granddaughter down to see what the noise was about. Trent lunged. He grabbed Lily by her small arm, lifting her off her feet. She shrieked, kicking her legs in the air, her pink dress swirling around her. Trent snatched a serrated steak knife from a nearby banquet table. He held the blade inches from her throat. "Back off," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Back off, or I will cut her. I swear to God I will do it. Get me a car. I want a car out front now." The FBI agents froze. They had their weapons drawn, but they could not fire. Trent was using my 5-year-old granddaughter as a human shield. He was shaking so badly that the knife was vibrating against her skin. One wrong move, one sneeze, one sudden noise, and he would slit her throat by accident. The room went deathly silent again. The only sound was Lily sobbing. I felt a cold sensation wash over me. It was not fear. It was clarity. I looked at Trent. I saw the madness in his eyes. He was not going to let her go. He was going to panic, and people were going to die. I reached behind my back to the waistband of my trousers. I had lied to myself in the office. I told myself I did not need the gun, but 40 years of instinct had overruled my conscience at the last second. I had tucked the Sig Sauer into my belt before I left the car, because I knew that monsters do not go down with just paper. "Jack, do not do it," the lead agent shouted, seeing my hand move. "Put your hands up." I ignored her. I ignored the federal agents training their sights on me. I only saw Trent. I drew the weapon in one fluid motion. I did not aim at him. At this distance, with a shaking target and a child in the way, the risk was too high. I raised the barrel straight up toward the vaulted ceiling, painted with cherubs and gold leaf. I squeezed the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. It sounded like a cannon going off. A chunk of plaster the size of a dinner plate exploded from the ceiling, raining white dust down on the crowd. "Drop it!" I roared, my voice booming through the ringing ears of everyone in the room. Trent flinched violently at the sound of the shot. He was a coward who liked to hurt women, but he had never heard a gun fired in anger. The shock broke his brain for a split second. His grip loosened. He cowered, covering his head instinctively, terrified that the next bullet was for him. That split second was all I needed. I did not shoot him. I walked toward him, my gun leveled at his chest. The look in my eyes told him everything he needed to know. I was praying for him to give me a reason. "Drop the knife, Trent," I said quietly, "or the next one goes through your eye." He looked at the gun. He looked at the agents closing in. He looked at me. He realized that his mother could not save him and his money could not save him. He dropped the knife. It clattered onto the marble floor. He pushed Lily away and fell to his knees, putting his hands on his head, sobbing like a child. Agents swarmed him, pinning him to the ground, but I did not watch. I holstered my weapon and ran to my granddaughter. I left the chaos of the ballroom behind me. I did not wait for the agents to secure the scene or for the paramedics to check on Trent. I had one goal left. One reason I was still standing. I sprinted toward the grand staircase, taking the marble steps 2 at a time. My bad knee screamed in protest with every impact, and my chest was heaving, but I did not feel the pain. Adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic when your child is on the line. I reached the second-floor landing and ran down the long hallway. The portraits of dead Caldwell ancestors seemed to glare at me from the walls, their painted eyes judging the man in the cheap suit who dared to storm their castle. I reached the end of the hall. The door to the guest wing where they had been keeping her was a heavy slab of solid mahogany. I reached for the handle, expecting it to be locked, but what I saw made my blood boil. It wasn't just locked, it was fortified. 3 heavy brass deadbolts had been installed on the outside of the door, not the inside. You put locks on the inside to keep people out. You put locks on the outside to keep an animal in. They had turned a bedroom into a prison cell. "Mia!" I shouted, pounding my fist against the wood. "Mia, can you hear me? It is Dad. Open the door." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that terrified me more than any gunshot. I pressed my ear to the door. I could not hear movement. I could not hear crying. I stepped back, giving myself room to move. I did not have a key, and I was not going to wait for a locksmith. I looked at the hinges. I looked at the frame. I took a deep breath and channeled 40 years of rage into my right shoulder. I threw my body weight against the wood. The door groaned, but the bolts held fast. I felt a sharp pain radiate down my arm, but I ignored it. I stepped back again. This time I aimed my boot right next to the center lock. I kicked with everything I had. The wood splintered with a loud crack. One bolt gave way. I did not stop. I kicked again and again. I was not just kicking a door. I was kicking down every lie, every manipulation, and every moment of helplessness I had felt for the last 2 weeks. With one final roar of effort, the frame shattered completely. The heavy door swung inward, banging violently against the interior wall. I stumbled into the room, my breathing ragged. It smelled of stale air and heavy perfume trying to mask the scent of sickness. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp on the nightstand. The first thing I saw were the suitcases. 2 large designer trunks stood by the door, packed and tagged. I glanced at the luggage tag. Zurich. They were ready. They had packed her life away like she was just cargo to be shipped. I kicked the suitcases aside, sending them crashing into the vanity, and rushed to the bed. Mia was lying on top of the covers, fully dressed in a gray travel suit. She looked tiny. Her face was pale, almost translucent against the dark sheets, and her hair was matted against her forehead. She was not moving. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, unnatural rhythm. I fell to my knees beside the bed and grabbed her hand. It was ice cold. "Mia, baby," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Wake up. Please wake up." I tapped her cheek gently. Her eyelids fluttered, but they did not open. She mumbled something unintelligible, a slur of words that made no sense. She was deep in the hole, dragged down by the chemical anchor they had forced into her system. But she was alive. I pulled her into my arms, lifting her limp body against my chest, rocking her back and forth. I buried my face in her hair. "You are not going to Switzerland," I told her quietly. "You are going home." I did not wait for the government paramedics to navigate the chaos downstairs. I had learned my lesson about trusting the system. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit the speed dial for the private medical team I had stationed in the van right behind the FBI raid vehicle. They were not bureaucrats. They were former combat medics who knew how to treat trauma in a war zone, and right now this bedroom was ground zero. "Get up here now," I shouted into the phone. "Room at the end of the hall. She is unresponsive." 30 seconds later, heavy boots thudded on the floorboards behind me. Dr. Evans ran into the room carrying a tactical medical kit. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He pushed me aside gently but firmly and began to work. He peeled back Mia's eyelids, shining a harsh penlight into her pupils. They were blown wide, dilated to the point where her eyes were almost black pools. "She is under heavy sedation," Evans said, his voice clipped and professional. "Likely a cocktail of benzodiazepines and scopolamine to keep her compliant for transport. Her respiration is depressed. We need to reverse it now, or she might stop breathing." I watched as he popped the cap off a syringe filled with a clear liquid. My stomach turned. I had spent the last 2 weeks trying to stop people from sticking needles in my daughter, and now I had to stand back and watch it happen. But this was different. This was not poison. This was the lifeline. Evans found a vein in her arm, one that had not been abused by Patricia's nurses, and slid the needle in. I held my breath. The seconds felt like hours. I squeezed her hand, feeling the fragile bones beneath her cold skin. I rubbed her knuckles, trying to spark some warmth back into her body. "Come on, Mia," I whispered. "Fight it. You are a reed. We do not quit." For a long, terrifying minute, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the distant wail of sirens outside. Then suddenly, a gasp tore from her throat. It was a desperate, hungry sound, like a swimmer breaking the surface after being held underwater. Her back arched off the mattress, and her fingers clamped down on my hand with surprising strength. Her eyes flew open. They were wild at first, darting around the room in panic. She saw the ceiling. She saw the broken door. She saw the strange man standing over her with a stethoscope. She tried to scramble back against the headboard, her breathing coming in short, sharp, hyperventilating bursts. "Mia, it is okay," I said, leaning into her line of sight. "Look at me. It is Dad. You are safe." She froze. Her eyes locked onto my face. I saw the fog clearing slowly. I saw the recognition fighting its way through the chemical haze. Her pupils constricted. Her breathing slowed. She reached up with a trembling hand and touched my cheek as if she needed to verify that I was real and not just another drug-induced hallucination. Her fingers were cold, but her touch was the warmest thing I had ever felt. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. She swallowed hard and tried again. Her voice was raspy, a broken whisper that sounded like it hadn't been used in weeks, but the words were clear. "Connor," she whispered, using the middle name she only used when she was teasing me. Then she smiled, a weak ghost of a smile that broke my heart, and put it back together all at once. "I knew you would come," she said. I buried my face in her shoulder, and for the first time in 40 years, I let myself cry. I had lost my house. I had lost my savings. I had burned my life to the ground. But holding her there in that wrecked room, I knew I was the richest man in the world. The driveway that had been lined with Bentleys and Porsches just an hour ago was now a chaotic sea of flashing blue and red lights. The beautiful landscape lighting that was meant to highlight the architecture of the estate now only served to illuminate the crime scene. Oscar had made sure that the FBI were not the only ones invited to the after-party. He had called the wolves. The press vans from every major news network in the city were parked haphazardly on the manicured lawn, their satellite dishes extended like eager antennas waiting for the signal. I stood on the stone balcony of the master bedroom, the cold night air feeling good against my face. I was not alone. Mia was wrapped in a thick blanket, leaning heavily against my side, her head resting on my shoulder. In my arms I held Lily, who had finally stopped crying and fallen asleep, gripping my lapel with her tiny fist. We were a battered, bruised trio, but we were standing. Below us, the heavy oak doors opened, and the show began. It was the kind of spectacle that Patricia Caldwell would have hated more than prison itself. She came out first, flanked by 2 federal agents. She was not the regal matriarch anymore. She was a disheveled wreck. Her expensive gown was torn at the hem and stained with dust from the stage floor. Her makeup was smeared, and her hair, usually sprayed into an immobile helmet of perfection, was wild and tangled. The moment she stepped onto the porch, the camera flashes erupted. It looked like a lightning storm. 100 shutters clicked at once, capturing her shame in high resolution. Reporters shouted questions that cut through the night air like knives. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you have a comment on the fraud charges? Is it true you drugged your daughter-in-law? How much money did you steal?" Patricia tried to lift her hands to cover her face to hide from the judgment of the city she tried to rule, but the handcuffs kept her arms pinned behind her back. She had to walk with her head down, forced to look at the ground, as she was paraded past the very people she used to look down on. Behind her came Bradley. He was even more pathetic. He was openly weeping, his shoulders shaking as he was led toward the transport van. He looked at the cameras with terrified eyes, knowing that his face would be on the front page of every paper by morning. The golden boy was tarnished forever. And finally Trent shuffled out, his head bandaged from where he had hit the floor, his aggression replaced by a sullen defeat. I felt Mia shiver against me. I tightened my arm around her. "Do not look away," I whispered to her. "Watch them. I want you to see this. I want you to see that they are not monsters. They are just people, and they can never hurt you again." Mia looked down at the scene. She watched as the agents guided Patricia into the back of the armored van. She watched as the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing her tormentors inside a steel cage. For the first time in years, I saw the fear leave her eyes. The spell was broken. The looming shadow that had darkened her life was just a sad old woman in a police car. The sirens wailed as the convoy began to move, rolling down the long driveway and out through the iron gates. The reporters scrambled to their vans to follow the story, leaving the estate suddenly quiet. The party was over. The guests were gone. The music had stopped. I looked down at the empty driveway and then at the sleeping child in my arms. I had lost my house. I had spent every dime I had to my name. I was technically homeless and broke, but as I stood there on the balcony of the mansion I now owned, breathing in the clean air of freedom, I knew the truth. I had saved the only things that actually mattered. The Caldwells had the money, but they ended up with nothing. I had nothing, but I ended up with everything. The fluorescent lights of the Federal Detention Center hummed with a sound that grated on the nerves. It was a stark contrast to the soft lighting and classical music of the Caldwell mansion. I sat on a bolted metal stool, staring through a thick sheet of scratched plexiglass. On the other side, Patricia Caldwell sat waiting. She was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that washed out her pale skin. Her hair was pulled back in a severe knot, and without her expensive makeup, she looked older. She looked human. But the moment she picked up the phone receiver, I realized that prison had not humbled her. It had only made her more desperate. "You look tired, Jack," she said, her voice tinny through the speaker. She tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "I hear you sold everything. Your house, your car, your retirement. You are a pauper, Jack. You won the battle, but you lost the war. You have no money left to fight the legal appeals I am going to file." I did not say anything. I just watched her work. She leaned in closer to the glass, her eyes narrowing. "I have a proposition," she whispered. "The trust fund. Mia's money. It unlocks next week. $10 million. You and I both know that Brad is technically still her legal guardian until the annulment goes through. We can tie this up in court for years. Or we can make a deal. You convince Mia to sign a settlement. We split the trust 50-50. $5 million for me to start over in Brazil. $5 million for you to buy your little house back. It is a win-win." She sat back looking satisfied. She really believed that everyone had a price. She really believed that money was the only language spoken on earth. I leaned forward and picked up the receiver. I did not raise my voice. I spoke to her like I was explaining the weather to a child. "There is no deal, Patricia," I said. "And there is no trust fund. Not anymore." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "Mia turned 29 yesterday," I continued. "The funds were released into her account this morning. She signed a power of attorney and asked me to handle a single transaction for her. You see, Patricia, we knew you would try to rebuild. We knew you would try to salvage the Caldwell name. So we decided to make sure there was nothing left to salvage." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I used the trust fund to buy the remaining assets of Caldwell Holdings," I said. "I bought the name. I bought the logo. I bought the client list. And then 10 minutes ago, I filed the paperwork to dissolve the corporation." Patricia's eyes went wide. "You cannot do that," she hissed. "That is my legacy. It is gone," I said. "I liquidated the assets. I sold the office furniture. I sold the patents. And I took every single penny of the proceeds and I donated it." "Donated it," she choked out. "To who?" "To a legal defense fund for victims of elder abuse and financial fraud," I said. "The Patricia Caldwell Foundation now pays for lawyers to put people like you in jail. Your legacy is not a real estate empire anymore. Your legacy is a charity that fights monsters." Patricia dropped the phone. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. She looked at her hands. She realized finally that she was not just in prison. She was erased. She had no money. She had no company. She had no name. "You are not just bankrupt, Patricia," I said, hanging up the phone. "You are extinct." I stood up and walked away, leaving her screaming silently behind the soundproof glass. I did not look back. I had a daughter to go home to. The soil in the backyard of the small rental house felt cool and damp against my hands. It was a good feeling, an honest feeling. It was a long way from the marble floors and manicured hedges of the Caldwell estate, but to me, this patch of dirt was paradise. I dug a small hole and pointed to the sapling waiting in the plastic pot. Lily squatted down beside me, her little hands covered in mud and her face smeared with dirt. She was laughing. It was a sound I had not heard in a long time, a sound that washed away the memories of sirens and shouting. "Careful now," I told her, guiding her hands. "You have to be gentle with the roots. If you give them good soil and plenty of sun, they will grow strong enough to weather any storm." She patted the dirt down with the seriousness of a surgeon, and then looked up at me with big, bright eyes. "Like Mommy?" she asked. I looked over my shoulder toward the house. The screen door was open, letting in the breeze. Mia was sitting at the kitchen table. She was not the ghost I had found in that fortified bedroom. She had put on weight, her cheeks were rosy, and her hair shone in the afternoon sun. She was on the phone, her voice clear and commanding, as she directed the allocation of funds for the new women's shelter downtown. She had taken the wreckage of the Caldwell fortune and built a fortress for others. She was using the money that was meant to silence her to give a voice to women who had none. "Yes," I said to Lily. "Just like Mommy." We finished planting the row of tomatoes and washed up with the garden hose, spraying each other until we were both soaking wet and gasping for air. We ate dinner on the porch as the sun went down. Simple food. Grilled chicken and salad from a bowl that didn't cost $1,000. We talked about school. We talked about the weekend. We did not talk about the past. The past was a closed book sitting in a dusty evidence locker somewhere. By 9:00, the house was quiet. Mia and Lily were asleep, safe in their beds. The neighborhood was silent save for the chirping of crickets. I sat in the living room in my old armchair, the one I had bought from a thrift store to replace the leather one I sold. I was tired in the good way that comes from physical work and peace of mind. But old habits are hard to break, and a father never truly retires from the job of protection. I stood up and began my nightly ritual. I walked to the front door and tested the deadbolt. It was solid. I checked the windows, making sure the latches were secure. I walked through the kitchen, checking the back door. I looked out into the darkness of the yard, scanning the shadows, not because I was afraid, but because I was ready. I walked down the hall and cracked open the door to Lily's room. I listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Then I checked Mia's room. She was sleeping soundly, no longer needing pills to find rest. I stood there for a moment in the hallway, a shadow guarding the light. The war was over. The monsters were in cages. But I was still the gatekeeper. I walked back to my chair and sat down, placing my phone within arm's reach. I closed my eyes, finally letting myself drift off, knowing that if the world ever tried to break down our door again, I would be waiting. I used to believe that justice was a place. I thought it was a building with marble columns and statues of blind women holding scales. I thought it was a system you could trust, a machine where you put in the truth and got out a fair verdict. But I was naive. 40 years of watching the world work should have taught me better, but it took seeing my own daughter in a cage to finally understand the reality. Justice is not a destination. It is not a gift that society hands you because you were a good citizen. It is not a right. Justice is a commodity. It is something you have to buy. It is something you have to build with your own bare hands, using whatever raw materials you can scrape together. Sometimes you build it with money. Sometimes you build it with evidence. And sometimes you have to build it with violence. It is not polite, and it is not clean. It is a dirty, desperate grapple in the mud, where the only thing that matters is who is left standing when the dust settles. The Caldwells thought they owned justice because they owned the judges. They thought the law was a wall that protected them from the consequences of their greed. They did not understand that walls can be breached. They did not understand that a father with nothing left to lose is a force of nature that no statute or loophole can contain. I did not beat them because I was right. I beat them because I was willing to burn down the entire forest to kill the wolves. I look at my hands resting on the arm of the chair. They are old hands. They are scarred and weathered. They have held steering wheels and forensic reports and guns. They have signed away a lifetime of savings, and they have held the trembling body of a daughter who came back from the dead. They are empty now, but they feel heavy. They feel the weight of what I had to become to save her. I had to become the thing I hated. I had to become a shark. I had to become a criminal in the eyes of the polite society. But then I listened to the silence in this house. It is not the silence of an empty nest. It is the silence of peace. I hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I hear the wind rustling the leaves of the tomato plants we put in the ground. These are the sounds of a life reclaimed. I balanced the ledger. I audited the account of pain and suffering, and I made sure the debt was paid in full. I looked down at the leather-bound book on my lap. It is an old habit keeping a log of the case. But there are no more entries to make. The investigation is closed. The suspects are in custody. The victim is safe. There is nothing left to analyze. I close the book. The sound of the cover snapping shut is soft, but it feels like a gavel striking a bench. It is finished. I reach out and find the switch on the lamp. The light clicks off, plunging the room into darkness. But I am not afraid of the dark anymore. I lean back in the chair, and for the first time in a long time I close my eyes without looking for a way out. Screen black. This story teaches us that true wealth is never measured in bank accounts or real estate. The Caldwells possessed millions, yet they were spiritually bankrupt. Jack lost every dime he owned, yet he walked away the richest man alive because he saved what mattered most. It reminds us that justice is not always given. Sometimes it must be taken by those brave enough to fight for it. When the system fails, love becomes the ultimate law. Family is not just about blood. It is about who shows up for you when the darkness falls and who is willing to burn down the world to keep you safe. If this story of justice and redemption moved you, please like and subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments, what is the one thing you would sacrifice everything to protect?